Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Christian Anthropology, tutorial day 2, our final session on the journey together. So, I'm going to do 3 things today. Firstly, give a small bit of feedback on the essays. Secondly, give you some more indicative guidelines as to what you can expect in the exam. And thirdly, to speak about one topic we've touched on briefly, but haven't dealt with in depth, which is the issue of contemporary theology of death, and perhaps some thoughts on how it might be amended, enhanced, perhaps reconsidered, reimagined. Okay, so let's start with the first thing, which is just a small bit of feedback. Say generally, the assignments were very good overall, and I'd say generally that's reflected in the marks. See, different people have different understandings of what good marks are depending on their own ambitions, and 68 might be a brilliant mark for some person, 42 might be a brilliant mark for some person, so it's to some extent good marks are in the eye of the beholder, but nonetheless. So in academic life, we're always on a journey, and the journey is towards best academic practice. So a couple of things maybe to bear in mind in the light of that. So the first thing to mention briefly, it's not an issue for everyone by any means, but it is an issue for some people, I think, which is the issue of the use of inclusive language. So rather than saying the study of man or whatever, the study of humankind would be better. To a lot of people, that is just political correctness. I think the way we do use words does matter, and unfortunately, there are a lot of areas in life where, in the past and even in the present, our language could be more constructive, let's put it nicely, euphemistically. So there has been an issue with the use of exclusive language in theology, in the church, in society as a whole, and so the continued use of man rather than humankind is, in academic life, is seen as unacceptable today. Just to say that there is, I think, a point where political correctness has gone mad, and during the summer, some of you might have heard, I think it might have been on Claire Burns' radio programme, they had a government minister for state, who I won't name, who did a long piece on the fact that the name of the Kerryman newspaper should be changed to reflect inclusive language. Now, I myself would think that that's Kerryman is part of Kerry life for generations, and I think most people understand that they're not saying this is just a newspaper for men in Kerry. So I do think there is obviously a point, and we have reached it in many areas where political correctness has gone mad. But saying humankind rather than man, I don't think meets that threshold. So that'd be one thing, just if possible. And even if it's not possible, try harder to make sure that it is possible. Now, just in terms of best academic practice, probably an issue that always arises is use of referencing, and most people are very good at giving a full quotation when giving a full reference when they give an actual quotation from an article. Most people, let's say, how would I quantify it? Let's say there are a significant number of people, generally, who need a little bit of nudging to try and ensure that when you're writing a piece in an academic article or an academic work, an essay or an exam question that is done using essay conditions, as you will, I would imagine, be doing. I'm recording this on the 30th of November, just in case restrictions kick in the Priory, as you can probably see, because I wanted to I don't want to be wanted to record this here because it gives the best quality, but we still haven't got, when I say we, the tutors haven't got any guidance on how you will be examined, but I'm presuming that it will be in the same format as last year. So some people are still hesitant, maybe, or sometimes do not always give a credit to someone's idea that they take. They always give credit to when it's a quotation, but basically when they have taken someone else's idea and kind of paraphrase it as their own. Now, under copyright law, there's there's a distinction here. One is under copyright. So basically, if I take an article from John Littleton and I use a sentence in my let's say I'm writing an academic article of my own, and I change it around, in strict legal terms, John Littleton cannot sue me for. So I change one word. In strict legal terms, he cannot sue me for breach of copyright. But in terms of good academic practice, he can certainly say, that is not good academic practice. It's borderline cheating to take one of his ideas, present it as my own, without attributing any credit to him. So a lot, I would say that unless you're brilliantly original, there should be a good number of references in any essay. We talked before how if you're quoting from the same source, and some people do this very well, using IBID, repeating the same source, or OP-CIT, for a source that was used in an earlier part of the work. Some people do that really, really well. Other people, though, there is, let's say, room for improvement in that general area of giving someone credit whose idea you have taken, and presented in your own phrasing, but it's someone else's idea. And it's fine if the person correcting it doesn't know where the idea came from originally, or who originally came up with that kind of idea first. But if they do, then it looks like bad academic practice. So what I encourage people is to have a number of references. Now, there were some people who did this really brilliantly. There were some people who did it moderately, and then there are some people who are at the other end of the spectrum. So what I would try and do is nudge people towards giving credit to where is due, basically, and it's just fair play. It's just good academic practice. Now, in the essays, I didn't mark anyone down for that, but I would like to see overall an improvement in that area. There are some people who are there already, and if you have, we say, 30, 40, 50, some people had over 50 references. That's they're obviously there already. There are other people then who have maybe 5 or 6. I think unless they are brilliantly original and they've thought of everything just completely new, that would seem a bit low, I would have thought, in essays like this. So what I would say is, if you can, it's a process, academic life, but definitely there is room for improvement across the area. Just in terms of marks then, I've talked about this before, I know, but just a reminder about the importance of message on message. What that means is people who get the highest marks are people who from sentence 1 to sentence last stay on message. There are people who get lower marks then. One of the reasons they would get lower marks is they kind of stray off into other areas that are, it's not that everything they say is fine, it's often very good, but it just isn't always helping answer the question that they're asked. Now, a lot of the time it could be useful in answering the question they're asked, but the link hasn't been made directly to the question that's been asked. So it's important to join the dots between what you're writing and the question that you are being asked. So, phrase that I've used previously, and I just remind you in advance of the exams, is specificity of the question. So, the questions, let's say, on sin, has actually, if you're to answer the question on sin, you need to know theology of sin well, but the question is asking you to come at it from a slightly specific focus. So if you're talking generally about sin and you're not linking it in directly to the question, you're not answering the question specifically enough, even though everything you write might be true. So hope that's clear. If it's not clear, in the live sessions, could you come back to me, please? Now, the one thing also that I tend not to get overly excited about at this level will be different now in a few years' time, when you're doing what's called an integrative project, which is basically a mini thesis. That's a different kettle of fish. But the one thing I would ask is that if whatever system you're using for referencing, you use a standard system throughout. Now, there'll be other people who will be looking for something very specific. My specific thing is don't start with one system, then halfway through change to another system, and then at the end have a different system again, or go back to the first one. So consistency is really important in terms of good academic practice. So these are just sort of guidelines that to help you hopefully pilot your 3 answers in your exams towards the highest possible marks, because one of the things that is very obvious to someone correcting the work is if a lot of work has been put into it, and that's something that I like to reward. If I can see someone has put a lot of work into it. The difference sometimes though is that students with the students with the highest marks use that good work specifically to answer the question they're asked, and to do that, answer the question they're asked all the way through. Sometimes though people write a lot and say a lot of good things, but just that they're not answering the question specifically enough, or if they are, they forget at times and veer off into more general areas. So that phrase I've used before, RTQ, refer to the question, from time to time, is important, and important for you, I think, too. And obviously in terms of exams, one of the most important rules is to read the question carefully. Don't read it just once, read it a few times, so to see that you're getting all aspects of the question. I would say underline it a few times. Is that a waste of time? Spending time on the question before you answer it? No, it's a good investment of time, because it's incredible the amount of people who rush into answering. And I've been guilty of this myself as a student, and I paid a high price for it, always. That I read the question quickly and turned out afterwards, when I came out after exam, that I misread the question slightly, somewhat, but definitely my marks suffered as a result. So what I would recommend is to read the question a few times, underline the key words, and make sure then that you're addressing all aspects of the question. Okay, why am I telling you this? I want you to do well. And unfortunately, exams are not just about knowledge, they're also about exam technique and methodology. And you need the students to do best are the students who have the knowledge and the exam technique. Sometimes though, the students with the knowledge and without the exam technique don't get the mark that their knowledge merits, and it's just unfortunate. But as I mentioned previously, there will be someone later on who will be going through some of your questions, so your answers, and will be checking to make sure that the highest standards are met. So I have that level of scrutiny as well, to make sure that I have checked for all of these different things, and that I too am someone who, by the way I correct, have an interest in best academic practice. Okay, so hope that's clear. Is that if not, we can have the opportunity to ask at the live session. Now I'm going to move now in the second part of the session towards the exam questions. The way Philip has the camera set up, can't really use the board. So to say, as I've said to you before, the Priory do not want me to tell you what the exam questions are. At the same time, I can give you very, very, very good indicators. A lot of you were with me from Spirituality and the Moral Life last year, and we can you kind of will know that the indicative questions that I will give you now are very similar to what you can expect in January. However, one caveat is the questions have to be approved by that external examiner. And again, why is to make sure that standards are maintained you're going to end up with a degree, and that has to mean something. It's important that your degree has credibility, so that means there has to be checks and balances to try and make sure that these proper standards are met. So, and again, those of you who were with me last year will know that not just me, but all of us have to submit 2 separate set of exam questions, 2 separate sets. Now, the issue is then when you send it in 2, you don't know which one is going to be used first. So for that reason, I am going to tell you what you can expect on both papers. Now, again, I mentioned this previously. One of the things the external examiner will not allow to go forward as exam questions if they look too similar to the essay questions. Okay, and going back to our discussion in the live session on Saturday for study day 2, just the issue about plagiarism. So you will not be the phrasing of the question will be different to the one you did in your essay. By the time I correct your exam questions, I will have corrected a number of different exams in other places, and I will have forgotten who wrote what in your essays. So, but I said I said on Saturday, I'm not a big believer that you plagiarise your own work. You certainly plagiarise someone else's work. So now other people might see it differently, and that's fine too. But I'm speaking, as always in these sessions, only for myself. So, what will the first question be? So the first question is, which is one of your essay titles, or similar to one of your essay titles, and I'm going to say it twice, probably even 3 times. Say it slowly. I said Philip has the camera set up here so that I can't really use the board. I was kind of, in the past, you would have set it up so I will be standing and I'll be able to write the questions on the board and you won't be able to see them. But anyway, so so if I'm speaking too slowly for some people, forgive me. If I'm speaking too fast, you can. I won't speak fast, but if I do speak too fast and someone misses a word or 2, again, you can ask me in the live session. So what I'm going to do first then is give you the 2 versions of the question 3 times each. Then I will explain what the question is asking, because that's your first task, to figure out what the question is asking. Okay, and then some of the questions might sound different to what you expected, because they don't sound like what your essay questions were, but I'll try and explain that, how they link in, if you like, with the essay questions. So again, if that's not clear enough, you can ask me at the live session. Okay, so exam question 1. To what extent does our Christological presuppositions determine our understanding of Christian anthropology? Okay, time 2. To what extent does our Christological presuppositions determine our understanding of Christian anthropology? One last time. To what extent does our Christological presuppositions determine our understanding of Christian anthropology? So that's version 1. I'll explain now in a moment what that means. But first I'm going to give you version 2 for the alternative paper. And again, those of you may not be aware that some students, for different reasons, bereavement, health issues and so on. And obviously, during COVID times, we're very conscious of the fact that we have a number of people who are studying in the Priory who are also frontline healthcare workers and frontline workers in other regions. And, they can be faced with challenging situations. So, in negotiation with the Priory, they can sometimes, if obviously they're get coronavirus and so on, at the time of doing the exam, that arrangements can be made. Now, that's nothing to do with me as such. That's a private thing with the Priory, but that's why there is that second version. I'm sorry if I didn't explain that clearly enough at the start. So, outline how they outline the teaching of one theologian you studied who embodies the true meaning of Christian anthropology. Outline how the teaching of one theologian you have studied embodies the true meaning of Christian anthropology. Outline how the teaching of one theologian you have studied embodies the true meaning of Christian anthropology. Okay, I'll say that one last time and more slowly. Outline how the teaching of one theologian you have studied embodies the true meaning of Christian anthropology. Okay, I'm going to start with the second version first, because it might seem to be further away from your essay title. So you will remember in our very first session we talked about how so here we're talking about preconceptions, presuppositions, and how we've talked about this many times, that phrase from Gustavo Guida is, we do not do theology from an innocent place. So what does that mean? We have biases and prejudices. So my understanding of Christ is going to have Christ, as we said in the first class way back in September, Christ is obviously a phrase I've used, I think, that day, the locus classicus, a great phrase to use in exam. Locus meaning place in Latin, classicus obviously meaning classic. So if you want to understand Christian anthropology, best place to start is with Christ. Why? Because Christian anthropology is Christian by definition, is Christianity, and anthropology by definition is humankind. So Jesus in the incarnation, the Word was made flesh. So Jesus brings the Christian and the anthropological together, the human together. God so loved the world that he sent his only Son to save us, and the Word was made flesh. So the incarnation is Jesus took on human form. And I mentioned to you previously the way we affirm that is such a great affirmation of the value of humankind. Now, the thing is, not everyone sees Christ the same way. So our understanding of Christ will shape our understanding of Christian anthropology. So if I am looking at Christ through a feminist lens, and I could, through looking at Luke's Gospel in particular, I could make the case that Jesus was a feminist, and that therefore Christian anthropology is feminist. I could make that case. Would I be fully correct in making it? I don't think so. I could certainly make a partial case. I think with anything, when you emphasize one dimension at the expense of all others, you're limiting yourself. So likewise, I could argue from the Gospels that Jesus was the first queen. He was very interested in environment. All his journeys talks about the rivers, mountains, desert, going up on Sermon on the Mount, being born in a stable, arguably, the most telling of all. So I could certainly say there's an ecological significance. Could I say it's the only one? I could, but would I be correct to do so? I don't think so. But certainly the ecological could be one dimension. Obviously, massive amount about justice in the Gospels from Jesus himself, and then Jesus is reaching back to the prophetic tradition and the care for the widow, the orphan, the old. So again, I could make the case that Jesus was a social justice campaigner. As you know, most of you, I'm a big admirer of Peter McVerry, and Peter sometimes presents Jesus as a social revolutionary that is challenging the social order of the time. So, how we look at Jesus is going to shape then our understanding of Christian theology and Christian anthropology. So this question is asking you to pick on one theologian you have studied. Now, this doesn't mean, I want to clarify this as clearly as I can. It doesn't mean you're limited to that one theologian. But let us say you pick, let's say, someone like Karl Rahner, who has has very rich understanding of Jesus, and he highlights a number of different elements about Jesus. So you could say, so supposing, let us say, you wrote your essay on Jesus, the Saviour, the Redeemer, social solidarity. Now, all of those things are in Rahner. So, and again, if your essay is based on, whoever your essay is based on, you can use your essay to speak about, let's say whoever author you pick or you quoted in your essay. Karl Rahner presents us with an understanding of Christ, that is, and there you go to the one that you used in your essay, and you use that same reference point, and then you can say that other people you might have quoted support it. This view is supported by other theologians, Yves Congar, Edward Schillebeeckx, Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II, whoever it is that you want to quote. Okay, so what effectively the question allows you to use that one author you have studied as a prism to explore other possibilities, other opinions as well. So it is not a case that you're restricted to talking about one author in this particular question. Okay? And so that is why, again, you can draw on your essay. Doesn't mean, though, going back to what I said earlier about the specificity of the question, you have to do a bit more work for reframing the question. Okay, so the first version then is kind of much more easier, more straightforward. But again, part of my restrictions is the external examiner will not accept questions that are too close. So paper 1 and paper 2 that I submit, if the questions are too closely alike, he will not accept them. And as I said earlier, if one or both are too close with the essay question, he will not accept them either. So hence the importance of rephrasing. So to what extent does our Christological presuppositions determine our understanding of Christian anthropology? So that's the first version, and that's basically very similar. It's basically a paraphrase of the essay question, saying to what extent, in other words, the way we see Jesus, or Christ opens up or determines or shapes critically the way we think about Christian anthropology. So hope that's clear. If not, again, you can ask me the live session. Okay, so our second essay topic, I think, might have been on suffering. The order on the paper now might be slightly different, but these are the questions. So this is the suffering question. So, does the prevalence of suffering present Does the prevalence of suffering present an insurmountable obstacle for Christian theology? Does the prevalence of suffering present an insurmountable obstacle for Christian theology? And one last time then, does the prevalence of suffering present an insurmountable obstacle for Christian theology? Okay, so that's version 1. And again, that is close enough to your essay title. For me personally, it doesn't, because of the case I made in, I think it was study day 1, about the whole thing about the cross. So, and looking at Luther and Moltmann and people like that. For me personally, the cross allows me to reframe the question, not how does a good God allow suffering, but to understand that the good God is suffering with me in my suffering. So that's how I personally answer the question. So for me it's not, for other people it may be. You can come at that from whatever angle you wish. And then we move on to the alternative version of it. Critically consider Christian theology's response to the problem of suffering. Critically consider Christian theology's response to the problem of suffering. Critically consider Christian theology's response to the problem of suffering. Now, I'm going to tell you how I personally would answer that question. You don't have to do it this way. But when we talk about Christian, the first thing I would do, though, going back to the specificity of the question, will be to challenge a little bit the question itself. Christian theology's response to the problem of suffering. The question implies that Christian theology, all replies are the same. As you know, they're actually not. So one way around it would be to say that, first of all, that shows that you understand that. Then to say that constraints of time and space preclude me from exploring all elements of Christian theology. Instead, I'm going to focus in on one approach. And then for me, I would go about the cross and all that. Then it's up to you then to pick one. But again, by taking the angle that Christian theology has not just a response, but a number of responses to the problem of suffering. You're showing due deference to the specificity of the question. And then you say, as I mentioned before, great phrase in exams, constraints of time and space preclude me from. So for that reason, I'm focusing in on. And then you've insulated yourself from from being criticized from not addressing all of those responses. So again, I hope that's clear. If not, you can ask me at the live session. So we move on to consider critically the interface between science and faith. Okay, so this is the science and faith question, which we touched on in, was it study day 2 or tutorial day 1? So this is the science and faith question, yeah. So consider critically the interface between science and faith. Consider critically the interface between science and faith. Consider critically the interface between science and faith. So this question is asking you to look at, it's a variation of your essay title about science and faith. Used to be strangers, perhaps now they are friends. Friends, though, in a very qualified way, that the church would say science has the potential to be a resource for humankind. The phrase I mentioned to you, the community of well-being. So me personally, science can be a resource for the community of well-being. Science obviously brings risk, and as Annette very passionately argued on their live session and study day 2, science needs checks and balances, and one I would suggest, Vatican II suggests, and church teaching suggests, that the church can enable science to ask the kind of important questions about, will this serve the betterment of humanity, or will it serve to be the destruction or contribute to the erosion of that community of well-being? So, yes, science can help, but history teaches us very loudly, very clearly, that science has a dark side, and we need to ensure that that dark side does not crucify or diminish humanity. And unfortunately, one of the things that emerged very clearly, for instance, in the Nuremberg trials, after the science was put on trial effectively for the way it had allowed Hitler to use science for a political agenda that was destructive to many people. Again, say it wasn't just Hitler. Science has been used in eugenics, the science that was created to further the creation of geniuses by Charles Galton and Herbert Spencer and people like that. In America, very much was used in the 1920s to discriminate against people because of skin colour, because of disabilities, and so on. So science has done a lot of things that were unethical, that did not advance the community of well-being, that actually did the very, very opposite, and undermined that sense of a community of well-being, or the common good, another way of describing it. So we have to try and ensure that they work, that basically science works for the advancement of that community. And that means asking hard questions about values, and about ensuring that there is a very strong ethical dimension to what science does. So the alternative version then would be, what is the relationship, if any, between science and faith from the perspective of church teaching? What is the relationship, if any, between science and faith from the perspective of church teaching? Okay, I'm conscious that I said the last two quickly, so I'm going to say them slowly. What is the relationship, if any, between science and faith from the perspective of church teaching? What is the relationship, if any, between science and faith from the perspective of church teaching? And that goes back to what I've just been saying. So it's a different version of what I said. Church believes science can help, but is also mindful of its darker side, and tries to ensure that science has an ethical compass to navigate it through the particular areas it is seeking to understand. Okay. So number 4 then is the sin question, basically. Version 1: outline a theological approach to sin that reflects the contemporary reality. Outline a theological approach to sin that reflects the contemporary reality. Outline a theological approach to sin that reflects the contemporary reality. Okay. So, now, the tutorial day 1, I think, was the time I spoke at length about this, and I explained how, and we talked about Augustine, and we talked about the manual tradition, and so on. Or was that? I can't remember now which day is which. So we talked anyway about how the manual system effectively made morality very much about sin, and an understanding of sin that was very much about law and rules and regulation. I mentioned to you then 1945, moral theology is renewed, begins with the publication of Bernard Ehring's seminal text, The Law of Christ. And he brings morality back to the law of love. Again, I have to keep saying this, it's not the love of pop songs, it's a very challenging love. It's the love that we see in the gospel that Jesus himself showed, which is not eros, erotic love, but agape, selfless love, thinking of other people before we think of ourselves. One love, the love of pop songs, is ego-centered. It's about what you can do for me. The love of the gospel is ego-transcending. It's about what I can do for you. I stress that because I know some people feel as soon as you start talking about love, you're excuse me, you're too liberal and too wishy-washy. This love stuff is very hard, very, very hard, because it's love one another as I have loved you. So, and in that context, then Vatican II speaks of sin, or a contemporary understanding of sin is the refusal to love. I mentioned to you how church teaching after Vatican II, influenced by its study of the social sciences, particularly psychology, social psychology, saw sin often in terms of alienation. So sin is that cause which causes to rupture our relationships with ourselves, first of all, maybe, with God, with other people, and increasingly then with the environment. Obviously, Pope Francis in Laudato Si is very keen on that fourth relationship, the relationship with the environment. He's not the only one, obviously, but he's one important figure. That will be an example of the type of thing I've talked about, how essentially moral theology or Catholic Church teaching then has followed moral theology in presenting a different understanding of sin as less about rule and regulation and more about living in right relationship, or a rupturing in that relationship. So basically I said, when I fracture my relationship or rupture my relationship with God, with other people, with the environment, or with myself. So second version then is, how can you speak about sin in a theologically meaningful way today? I'm obviously conscious of meaningful meaning today, or since last year, meaningful Christmas. But how can you speak of sin in a theologically meaningful way today? How can we speak of sin in a theologically meaningful way today? That is very close to the first version of the question. You can maybe get away with that once, so I'm kind of hoping that I can here. But essentially it's the same question, just phrased in a different way. Okay, and then finally we move to the question of death. Now, I mentioned I'm going to talk about this today, so can I first of all apologise if for some people death, particularly after bereavement, is a very raw topic. And I'm sorry if I'm trespassing on memories here for people, and trespassing in particular if there are recent memories from my own experiences with bereavement. The wounds never heal. But what does happen, two things happen, I think, is, and I hope for those people who are struggling, what I would say, the two things I would say would be, one, it's not that the wounds heal, but you just learn to manage the wounds better. And the second thing is that you achieve a better balance between not this horrendous sense of what you've lost only as time goes by. I hope you will experience a better balance between, yes, a sense of what you've lost, but also a gratitude for all the time you had together. So, but I'm conscious, that this is not an easy topic talking about. I assure you, it's not a topic that I would willingly talk about. But unfortunately, there are only two real realities, life and death. That we can escape a lot of things, but sadly none of us can escape death, and that's why it's important that we talk about it in theology and don't shy away from it. And sometimes people are very reluctant to talk about it. In fact, as you know, there are many people who are reluctant to use the word death. They'll talk about they passed on. Is that a good thing? Is a bad thing? I'm not sure. But I'm definitely not sure that it is a good thing, put it like that. One of the things that over the last number of years, the last 2-3 years, some people will have heard of the Ursuline sisters, so I've been writing their history. One of the things, or did write their history was published last year. One of the things I got from that was that when someone dies, they never say she died, they never say she passed, they say, one of their sisters in particular dies, they say she's gone to God, and they all say that, and it just really, really struck me. And I kind of think that's a nice way of looking at it. The idea of coming home, the journey home, and kind of thinking of death as part of the journey home. And I kind of like that idea. The idea of coming home for Christmas is a phrase we're going to hear a lot in the next few weeks. Hopefully, COVID restrictions allowing for that. So, I don't know if anyone is young. I'm sure you're all way, way too young to remember 1990, but in 1991, in 1990, there was a priest called Father Martin Tierney, who was head of the Catholic Communications Institute, and he was concerned that a number of priests were quite a number of priests were missing out on the positive aspect of the Christmas story, and were kind of making sermons constantly every Christmas bemoaning the commercialization of Christmas and presenting Christmas in a very negative way, and that was turning people off, or turning a number of people off from attending church services. And if I'm honest, I would not be attracted to that, to a mass where I was just going to, and I've had many of them, unfortunately, down the years. You know, you're there midnight mass and you're expecting a lovely, uplifting sermon, because the Christmas story is such a lovely story, such a great story as a story, and it's a story that fires your imagination, or should fire your imagination, and certainly could fire your imagination. But a sermon about the bemoaning the commercialization of Christmas is not going to fire, certainly doesn't fire my imagination. But anyway, Martin Tierney's idea, unfortunately Martin died a number of years ago, lovely man, was parish priest I think in Mount Marion for a number of years, but he had this idea of coming home for Christmas, and the idea was that encouraging people who had fallen away from attending church regularly to return to going to mass over Christmas. And to me, I thought it was just a lovely idea. I thought it was lovely though to associate the church with home and coming home, you know. And I think you know, one way of thinking about death maybe is in terms of coming home. So that's just kind of to try and preface our discussion a little bit. So so the question on death is it's I suppose again a variation of your essay question. To what extent, if any, do we need to seriously consider the needs of bereaved people in a contemporary theology of death? To what extent, if any, do we need to seriously consider the needs of bereaved people in a contemporary theology of death? To what extent, if any, do we need to seriously consider the needs of bereaved people in a contemporary theology of death? Okay, and that's, again, I've touched on this before, kind of saying for me, there is a pastoral dimension, and obviously we do funeral as well, and people will say we do, obviously COVID was, you know, there was a huge focus on the fact that people were denied funerals during the lockdowns during COVID times, and only 6 people being attended, and you know the difficulties that creates, and the additional stress that creates for people, and sadness, and the loss that they have of not having people to share in their mourning. So we do funerals well in Ireland, I would concede that, but one of the things that I'd be saying, and I'll go back to this, is do we think enough though of the people who are left behind? So the variation then of that then is, to what extent, if any, do we need to respond to the assertion that the needs of the living should be at the heart of a contemporary theology of death? To what extent, if any, do we need to respond to the assertion that the needs of the living should be at the heart of a contemporary theology of death? To what extent, if any, do we need to respond to the assertion that the needs of the living should be at the heart of a contemporary theology of death? Okay, and that's kind of it is essentially the same question again, except phrased very differently, but it's asking the same question again. So I suppose for the next half hour or so, I'm going to talk then about my thoughts on this question. and I'm giving a personal view. You do not have to agree with me by any means. But I suppose, we do not do theology from an innocent place. We certainly do not do death from an innocent place. So I can remember, so I suppose for me, reflection on death started very early. Started when I was 5, when my father died. And many years ago, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. And that's why I said about reopening wounds, because I'm not just remembering that day, I'm kind of reliving it now. I can see the whole thing. I can see walking in the footpath of our house. My father had been in St. Vincent Hospital. He had needed a kidney transplant. He didn't get it. He died. He was 35 years of age. My mother was 27. She had 3 kids. So I was out on the farm with my grandfather. We walked in. The news had been given to my mother, and I heard, can still hear it now. It's like I said, watching a film and hearing the film in sonic version. I can hear the screams, demonic screams of my mother as I was walking in the footpath, not knowing what was going on, and opening the door, walking in, and seeing my mother in the corner of the room. Some neighbours around trying to give her comfort, but not being in a position to really comfort her very much. And then me not knowing what was there, and then I can remember exactly the spot I was in the kitchen. I can see it now, when my sister, who was 3 at the time, crying, I'm sure not really understanding fully what she was saying, but Daddy is dead. And so that's what I'm saying about wounds not healing. These things are obviously very difficult. But I suppose thinking, I suppose, like going to the funeral and month's wine mass, and I can see all of that. Obviously, seeing a great sorrow, seeing my mother, where she's sitting in the church now. I could see her in black, as was a fashion at the time, the black veil, and her wearing that for a year, which was the fashion also at the time. But I do have a memory of the priest speaking, and talking about presenting very much death as a glorious term, and that basically what I took from it, and I'm obviously there are probably nuances to that escaped me at the time, but basically saying that this was a good thing, that my father was with the glory of God. And that phrase stuck with me. That's kind of one phrase, that basically this was something glorious. I could tell by my mother that whatever else experience she was having, glorious was certainly not one way for it. And I also, of course, understand that what can you say to someone in this situation? Words just are inadequate. So I'm not saying that there is a magic words or something that the priest could have did that would have eased the pain. I'm not saying that. And when I talk to someone who's recently bereaved, I always say, I wish I had some magic words for you, but I don't, because there aren't any. So the funeral happened, the month's mind happened, and then for the first while, there were people who were kind of looking out for my mother and for us. There's, so I was 5, older sister was 3, my younger sister was 10 months when he died. So there was support initially, certainly at the start, but obviously quickly people move on and they have other issues, and I completely understand that, and I'm sure I have to work hard not to be that person myself, and to try and remember that grief is an ongoing process, and that it doesn't end after the month's point, that there are people who who need support, so I suppose for me that kind of, that's what I'm talking about, death as a pastoral experience now. In the case of my mother, emotionally very difficult time, but we had a small farm. My father had done some work part-time with a friend of his and got paid for it, but because if he had got a shilling more, my mother would have got a contributory pension. As it was, she got a non-contributing widow's pension, which without it we couldn't have survived, but had she got a contributory pension, the difference would have been huge. The difference would have been the difference between just about scraping to hang on, or a small bit of comfort. So like the pastoral challenge is just to be there for people and make sure that they're okay, the people who are left behind. And I can still remember very much many nights when my mother would be crying, worrying about money. Now that said, I did receive a very powerful pastoral lesson myself, Christianity, from my mother at that time, because my father died at the end of October, so 2 months later was obviously Christmas. Very, very difficult time emotionally and financially, but the one I suppose comfort that we had was that we had my mother's sister had married relatively speaking a wealthy farmer, and they had no children. So when things got really, really bleak, my aunt was able to help us out financially, to stop us from kind of going under. But one of the things that she did for us that Christmas was she made the most stunning Christmas cake and iced it up at the time in a way that I had never seen. My 5-year-old's eyes had never seen, and Kavanagh talks about the wonder that was in every little thing when we looked at it as children in his poem Advent. And certainly to me that cake was the 8th wonder of the world. So my mother put it on a kitchen table on Christmas Eve, so that she kind of had been telling us that Santa was it was a very hard year for Santa this year, and basically preparing us that Santa wouldn't be able to bring us too much. But they kind of said, well, even if Santa's done it, you're going to have this amazing cake. So that was left on the kitchen table, and I was literally and metaphorically as well licking my lips all of Christmas Eve. So Christmas night comes, Christmas Eve, the night time, the evening, Christmas Eve, around about 4:30, 5 o'clock, there's a loud knock on the door. Of course, I'm jump for joy because I'm convinced that it's Santa Claus, and rush to the door, open the door. I'm expecting to see Santa Claus, but instead I see a traveller woman who lives just down the road, on the side of the road, and with 2 children. And they come in, and my mother invites them in, which you would do, especially at Christmas, and makes them a cup of tea. And because the Christmas cake, my beautiful Christmas cake, the 8th wonder of the world, is on the Christmas tea, you can't really take it away and give them just some Marietta biscuits, which I think is probably all we had in the house at the time. So the cake had to be cut, and I could feel my heart sinking, because it's going to be less cake for me, obviously. Talking earlier about ego-centered and ego-transcending, I was very much in ego-centered mode, and ego-transcending at that time was the phrase or the concept hadn't entered my consciousness or my soul, probably. So I was very much me, and this was going to be my thing. And so mother cut the cake for our 3 guests, and she cut big kind of slices, and I was kind of gritting my teeth, saying that should be for us, they should be for us. But I was saying to myself. So anyway, my mother talked to the traveller woman, and 2 children drank the tea at the cake but didn't say anything. So then after about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, the mother set up to leave. Oldest daughter set up to leave. The youngest daughter would be kind of my age. I can still see her now. Very pale face, but huge big blue eyes. I could still see them. And she hadn't said a single thing since she walked in. She was kind of looked like she was shy. But when her mother and sister sat up, what did she do? She pointed the cake and said, more. So my mother's got them to sit down and made another pot of tea and for them, and gave them another slice of cake. Now, 1 slice of cake for each of them did damage to the cake, but giving them 2 slices did serious damage, and I could hardly control my anger. It was kind of a seething mass of anger that we had given away this our one thing that was going to save Christmas for us. So anyway, I went out. They went out and thanked my mother for her kindness and wished us all happy Christmas. And I know I should have been generous and soulful and said that was a good thing, but as soon as the door was closed, I kind of shouted at Mother, how could you do that? You've ruined Christmas. It's going to be nothing for us. All that lovely cake, which is the only thing we had, is ruined. And I kind of almost was in a bit that was left in a fit of rage and pique, was going to almost attempt to throw it on the floor, or throw it into what we called the hens bucket, which is where all the food rubbish was dumped for the hens for the next day. And my mother very calmly said, you won't go hungry. And we didn't. And we didn't ever, but there were times when it was close enough. And there were times where not for my aunt, we probably would have. So just, I suppose, the pastoral dimension is, I think, one of the issues is, I think, just to make sure that people are okay. I'm not saying it's not when I'm talking about the church. I'm not just saying, I'm not talking necessarily about priests, but I'm talking about us as the people of God. And I know that not something I do with everyone, but I do try sense that experience has stayed very much with me, and kind of think of support, emotional, if you can. Sometimes just a little bit of financial, sometimes a little bit of kindness, tenderness, 10 of biscuits, a box of chocolates at Christmas, whatever, something like that, or just calling now and again, very gently, and just saying, I'm in a hurry, can't stay. Someone give me these box of chocolates, I'm not going to eat them, you might like them. So, those kind of simple, practical things. But also remember that people are lonely, and then I understand this is a very difficult area for people, and there are some people who are not always suited to talking to people who are bereaved or broken. And there's a high level of skill attached, but sometimes you can let people know without saying anything. And we men, I suppose in particular in Ireland, have learned that skill. Men of a certain generation, hopefully that will change, that we're more emotionally honest and mature in expressing our feelings. But there are that death does generate an emotional issue that you need help with. And that death affects us in a way that is different to most other experiences. And again, I'm just going to illustrate this from my own experience. When I was growing up, my father married into my mother and those sisters, so she was inherited the farm, and so my father moved in to her house with my grandparents to run the farm. So he too had been brought up on a farm in kind of a neighbouring parish, and then that farm was passed on to his sister, who had stayed back to mind his mother, who was not well. So, but anyway, every Sunday my father would go down to visit the home place, even after his mother died. His mother would have died shortly after I was born. His sister then rented out the farm and went to train to be a nurse. But my father would go down every Sunday just to check that things were okay, and then he would go into the local shop across the road from him to the local shop, undertaker, post office, pub. It was all there in the one spot. The place has become famous in recent years because the place is beside a lake called Loch Finchina, which floods at various times, and Kieran Malooly every year used to be down on RT News looking at the flood victims. Primetime did a feature on it just over the summer, about how the local people wanted to get drained, to stop the flooding, but some environmentalists have stopped them from doing that. And so it's kind of a well-known flooding spot. But anyway, he would go in every Sunday, to his neighbour, and they would chat and they'd talk about everything from football to the price of cattle, and stuff that I had no interest in. But I used to love going with them because while they were talking, his friend would be behind the counter serving. Other people would come in and they would talk for an hour every Sunday. But while they were talking, I would get a glass of orange. I mean, a glass of orange, not just orange squash now, real proper orange out of a bottle, which was, wow, like kind of Christmas every Sunday for me. So at the start, I would gulp down the orange very quickly, but then as I got more experience of the whole process that was going to last an hour, I learned to kind of sip the orange, so that over the full hour, to keep my interest, I would take a sip now and a sip later, and have, take a good gulp then towards the end. And it was, my way of making sure that I was just watching the bottle of orange all the time. I could hear the conversation, but I was just watching the glass of orange all the time. So, but one day I was more bored than usual, and very early on, thought I'm going to get a little game to distract myself. just a flick at the orange with my fingers, but a glass of orange like this. And unfortunately, I flicked too hard and spilled the entire glass of orange. So the orange spilt all over the counter. My father was mortified. You can still see his face now. He didn't give out to me, but the look he gave me told me all I needed to know. The neighbour, no bother, he could not have been nicer about it. Got out the club, mopped up the glass of orange, and of course I was crying. I was crying not because I had, not because I had made a mess, but because all my orange was gone. My father's friend went back into the shop and came back with a flake, a full bar of flake. I'm sure some of you will remember that ad, only the crumbliest, fakiest chocolate tastes like chocolate never tasted before. And like a flake was something back then that I had hardly ever tasted. But I'd seen, we just got a TV and I'd seen the ad, so a flake was, wow. This was like a glass of orange was amazing. I'd once before I'd had a flake, I remember that. So this is my second time having a flake, and I just associated with just like Christmas. This was magic. So anyway, I began kind of at the flake, and my father finished up the conversation and said we're going to leave now. And as I was just taking the very last little crumb, not going to waste a single crumb of chocolate from the flake, putting it in my mouth, as we got in the car. And just as started the ignition, very soft, very gentle voice, my father said to me, "You never give me any." And at that moment I felt a total horrible, mean, nasty person. Now, obviously, it was a great lesson about the importance of sharing, but he as a teacher, I really admire the way he handled it. He didn't shout, he didn't complain. It was just a very soft, calm, gentle put down, and you didn't give me any 5 words. Lesson I learned for life. Of all the lessons I learned, never forgot that one. Will never forget it. Never forget it. To my dying day, I will never forget it, and beyond, I'm sure, will never forget it. And it was just 5 simple words. No shouting, no anything. But I felt horrible. Now, when my father died, that was first memory, first thing that came in. When I was told about my father dying, that was the first thing that came into my mind. And to this day, every time I go down to visit my father's grave, I have to pass that shop. And when I'm coming back in particular, every time I drive up the hill that we started to drive up when my father said the thing about the flake, "You never give me any," I literally get a pain in my chest every single time. Because of the guilt that I feel. So that just, I suppose, highlights the fact that death is on a different level. It affects us at a whole level that's beyond rational. Now, I know in my head, rationally, that I was 5 years. I wasn't. Yeah, I was 5 years of age. So, I shouldn't beat myself up too much. But my rational part of my head says that, but because death affects us at below the rational, I just can't let that go. I've never been able to let that wound go, and I carry that guilt around with me all the time. And I said literally, it manifests itself physically when I drive up that hill, because I relive that whole experience. So one of the reasons, I think, that highlights the importance of the pastoral and helping and caring for the people who are left behind. And it's quite a high skill job now. I'm not minimizing it, and people grieve the same. So you need to find a different way of responding, a different way of dealing with the person, who you're trying to support. And some people, it might mean talking and let them listening or whatever. You just have to navigate your way through, and it's been attentive to what's said and what's unsaid. But that's a big pastoral challenge, and each pastoral challenge is different. Each person is different, so there's no one size fits all. We need to adjust as we go along. So to me, that's the importance of the living. That's obviously why we have funerals. It's for the living as much as for the dead. But then the second thing that I mentioned before to you that I think is important in terms of rethinking the way we understand death is the growth since the 1960s of process theology. And process theology is that let's seeing everything as one finite thing. So creation. God created the world. Yes, God created the world. Christians believe that. But process theology would say that creation is ongoing. And I believe that we can be part of God's creative project when we do something that enriches the environment. Redemption happened on Good Friday, but we can also continue to play our part in God's redemptive project when we try and heal the hurts of people, as I've been describing just now. Salvation, likewise. Salvation happened, but salvation is ongoing, and we too can be part of God's salvific project when we do things that build the kingdom of God through helping other people. So what process theology says is that death is not just a moment, it's a process that begins as we get older, then maybe through illness, perhaps through terminal illness, and then there's a moment of death, and then there's after the death, the journey home, the journey of going to God. And to me, the process theology then began that kind of idea in theology, but the people who've taken the whole process approach to death to the fullest is the hospice movement. And probably by the time you're watching this, there'll be they will have the hospices like Harold's Cross famously have a candle lighting service in the run up to Christmas to remember those who have died. But if you talk to people who've had a loved one who's been through the hospice, the way they talk about the journey that they were on with the loved one, and that began before, it goes on during, it continues right to the very, very end, and after. That they're not left behind, just after the funeral is over. There is ongoing support, if necessary, depending on the needs of the person. So I do think we can learn from process theology and from the hospice movement in taking what I would describe as a richer understanding of death that begins before death, the journey through illness, as death comes closer, that journey again takes a different dimension. Then there's death, there's the funeral, then there's after. But to think of death not just as the moment, but as a journey. And obviously, Christians have always believed that the journey is about the soul's opening up to God. Now today I would say we think more holistically. That's not just the soul, spirit, whatever it is, but that idea of a journey. So that's, I suppose, what I'm saying is kind of reframing, recalibrating death to reflect very much the needs of others. I know this has been a very somber kind of conversation, so I'm just going to finish with a light moment, a light true anecdote. This is a true story. It happened two years ago. So even if you're not very musical, you'll be familiar with the chorus, and the three sisters and the brother, and their parents both died, and one of them went through the hospice movement. So one of the singers, Andrea, the main singer in the group, Andrea, has a strong affiliation with the hospice movement. She's done a number of charity events for them. So 2 years ago she went to visit, she went to sing and be the special guest at the the lighting of the candle ceremony in Earl's Cross. And before that, then she went around and she met a number of people, and one of the men she met was very close to dying, and he regained consciousness, and just as she walked into the room, and Andrea, I think it's probably fair to say that most people would say is quite an attractive woman. So he opened his eyes, looked at her, then looked at her again, and asked the question, "Am I in heaven?" Which I thought was just a lovely attitude to have. So hopefully, I do think that we can learn a lot from the hospice, we can learn a lot from process theology, but also we can do better, I do think, pastorally in our support for people who have lost loved ones. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to talking with you at the live session. Thanks.